So in the last video, I was giving a brief account of the kind of situation that a lot of people find themselves in today. This being kind of in between, of feeling that they can't go back to traditional religion, which they consider superstitious or simplistic, and yet yearning for more in life, not finding their current life satisfying. In this video, I'm going to offer the story and account of a flourishing life, of someone who was able to pass through that desert of criticism and find a fuller kind of life on the other side. So the example I'm going to use is that of Thomas Merton. Not because you have to be a monk to move through this desert of criticism, not because you have to be as smart as he was. I'm mostly using Merton's example because his life, his biography is public, and I can talk about personal details of his life that I couldn't share about my students or other people I know who have gone through a similar kind of journey. If you're curious about more of Merton's story, of course he has many biographers, but I recommend Walter Kahn's book Christian Conversion, which looks at Merton's life through a psychological and religious lens. So Thomas Merton, many people know him as the famous Trappist monk and spiritual writer, although earlier in his life he was the furthest thing from monastic or a saint. He, in many ways, his early life embodies much of this critical consciousness, this kind of experience that I was just talking about in the previous video. Following his father's death in 1931, Merton really kind of, I don't want to say flew off the handle, but began living. He felt that he was freed, and he began living a very hedonistic life. Just seeking pleasure for himself, doing what he wanted to do, basically, and what he felt he couldn't do when his father was watching over him before. In this life, he really had no use for God. He disdained the institutional church and didn't believe in God. He had rejected what he would later look back on as an overly simplistic image or idea of who God was. So given the image of God that he had, he rejected that image. He didn't believe that God existed. And so he led a life that was very hedonistic, materialistic, or perhaps naturalist, in the sense that he embodied this kind of mentality I was talking about in the previous video, that he just saw the world as a material place. There was nothing particularly spiritual or supernatural about it. So he during these years, he came back to the United States, where he was born, and attended Columbia University. He was very successful at Columbia in some respects. He was certainly very busy. It was kind of this relentless working and activity that I was talking about before. And he was a smart guy. He did well. He was successful, and even took on some kind of leadership roles. However, after a while, he really grew disgusted with everything about this life, about the pleasure seeking, about life as he experienced. It was not enough. It felt empty for him. And so he was fortunate at Columbia to meet a good group of friends, a group of teachers and friends who proved to be the truest kind of friends, in the sense that they really helped him to begin to take spirituality seriously, but in a way helped him to begin to take his own humanity seriously. Some of his teachers, they exposed him to authors like William Blake, Jacques Merton, St. Augustine, and in reading these authors and talking with his teachers and friends, he realized that, like his image of God, really his understanding of reality was too simplistic. His sort of naturalistic understanding, that was not what the kind of world that science or an analytical mind could reveal to him. was not adequate to describe the fullness. There's more to reality than what he had been seeing up to this point. And so these teachers, these authors, helped him to see that sort of the scientific mindset was not enough. So this is what began to open him to the spiritual and to the supernatural. And he found himself, in spite of himself, attracted to the Catholic Church that he had written off before. And to make a long story short, eventually he was baptized and did enter into the Catholic Church. Some years later, after some discernment, entered the Trappist Abbey at Gethsemane, and so went through quite a change, quite a conversion. And this transformation in him was really solidified by deepening his practice of prayer, his personal experiencing of the mystery of God and of God's love. And so to offer one of Merton's own reflections on this, you see this quote from a collection of his writings called Contemplation in a World of Action. And so this is now Merton looking back over that critical phase that he went through. And so he experienced at this time what a lot of people experience today, that it's an experience of the world is just sort of emptiness, of desolation. He found himself unable to believe what Christianity proposed to him. So looking back on this, he would later write, "Though this experience may be to some extremely painful and confusing and raise all kinds of religious problems, it can very well be a sign of authentic Christian growth and a point of decisive development in faith, if they are able to cope with it. The way to cope with it is not to regress to an earlier and less mature stage of faith, to stubbornly reaffirm and to enforce feelings, aspirations, and images that were appropriate to one's childhood and first communion." So this is the situation that a lot of people find themselves in. They feel they can't, in integrity, go back to that childish understanding of religion and of God. What he says we can do or should do, one must, on a new level of meditation and prayer, live through this crisis of belief and grow to a more complete personal and Christian integration by experience. So you see here Merton, again, looking back at that critical phase that he had passed through, recognizing that it was not enough, and suggesting, pointing to a way forward, or a way out of that desert experience that he went through, that so many people are experiencing today. And in part, he says that's through prayer. It's coming to a more mature, personal experience of God. So this points to a really important question for our Christian communities, is how can we enable other people to pass through that desert of criticism, that to emerge from this critical culture and critical consciousness in the way that Merton did. So Merton certainly points to prayer, but this is part of what I am striving towards, trying to get us to think about in my book, Converting the Imagination. Is what can communities do to help people emerge from this kind of critical consciousness and find a life of flourishing, find a life that is more full of meaning.